Okay, so today I'm going to tell you a story that has already been told by Truman Capote. Now, Truman Capote was a writer in the 60s or something like that, 50s, 60s, who made a name for himself with In Cold Blood. It was a #1 hit, everyone loved it, and the book was based off of a factual murder in Kansas, small Midwestern town, which just made everyone go crazy because, the Midwest isn't supposed to be all murder one, whatever. Anyway, after Truman wrote In Cold Blood, there was about 13 years where he was working on his next big thing, and people were getting anxious, because deadlines were going and nothing was happening, and so finally, after 13 years, Truman Capote hands his editor a copy of what he called hand-carved coffins. And the idea of hand-carved coffins was that there was a... Hang on one second. There was a rancher in a small town in Midwest America that had a river running through his land, and the town needed to divert the river to irrigate the town's crops and everything, but the rancher didn't want to do it. But the town's committee voted against it 8-1, so like one person was on the rancher's side. 8 people were like, no, you gotta divert it. And then, after the diversion happened, people started dying. The first 2 victims were bitten by methed up rattlesnakes that were found in their car. So they got in their car, and lo and behold, there's really aggressive rattlesnakes, and they just, bit them. Then victim number 3 and 4 were a married couple that were locked in the basement of their house. Actually, they were living in the basement as their house was being restored, but they were sealed into their basement, and it was set on fire, and they burnt to death. Victim number 5 was decapitated in a Jeep by a hanging wire. And then number 6 was poisoned. Number 7 drowned in a swimming accident. And the 8th victim saw that all the other ones were dying, so he fled to Hawaii. And then the one person who voted for the rancher was spared. In the book, the killer's name is Robert Quinn, and the detective is Jack Pepper. Capote claimed this was a true story, but he lied. That's just real. He lied. He finally admitted to the small Midwestern town being in Nebraska. But there was, who was it? Someone in 1992 went to go investigate this. His name was Lenny Gilman. And he went to go talk to the detective that Capote worked with for In Cold Blood, and asked him about, hey, do you know anything about this? And he goes, well, this isn't true. I've never worked in Nebraska, but after reading this, I see some similarities with a case I did work. And that detective told Gilman about this story. In Ensign, Kansas, there was a guy named Richard Anton. Born in 1925, survived the Dust Bowl, survived, the Great Depression, everything. And in 1944 got married to a girl named Ann. Now, Richard's dad was like, hey, you can't take over the ranch. I don't think you're competent enough. So Richard and Ann moved to Kansas City, where they had 4 boys and a girl. And Richard started up small businesses like coin-operating vending machines, doing hot dog stands and whatnot, with success, because back in the 60s, those things were successful. After seeing the success, Richard's dad was like, okay, you can take over the ranch. So they moved back to Ensign, and Richard was really good at ranching as well. In fact, they called him an aggressive rancher because he was making deals to take over other lands and everything like that. So he had his own land that he worked, plus properties he rented out to other ranchers, everything like that. And he was acquiring all these through deals. Like legitimate deals, but still people didn't like how it was going. And then there was a guy named Hilton W. And Hilton rented out a farm from Richard. And one day Richard was like, "Hey Hilton, you guys got to go because I'm giving this land to my son as a wedding gift." And that made Hilton mad because, I mean, you know, he had a job and then all of a sudden he didn't have a job. And Hilton was known to be a angry person, I guess. He temper problems. And shortly after Hilton was kicked off his land, things started happening to Richard and his family. The first being that in '74, their garage caught fire. Not their barn, but their garage. And at looking at their pickup, they noticed that every nut on a wheel was missing. And also their combine had been damaged, like the steering mechanism was messed up. Then in the same year, a rattlesnake was found in Richard's car with the rattle off. So that warning of a rattle wasn't there for Richard to hear. Fortunately, he saw it before the snake bit him, got out of his car, called the cops, and the snake was removed and shot. Then, later that same year in June, Richard and Ann are living in the basement of their house as it's being remodeled, and it catches fire. And so Richard and Ann die in the fire. And once the smoke clears, never mind the pun, the investigators noticed that Richard and Ann had been shot beforehand and their bodies were completely covered in gasoline. And the only real suspect they had at the time was Hilton. So the detectives go and talk to Hilton and everything like that, and Hilton claims he was at home, and his wife agrees that Hilton was at home, and there's no forensic evidence to point to Hilton, and the more they interview him, the more he's not talking, he's sticking to his story. And so they can do nothing more than suspect Hilton. They also had other leads, like maybe it was a KC mob or something like that. But the fact of the matter remains, everyone thought it was Hilton. Because Hilton had a tendency to be around fires. He had lit other barns and garages on fire, which he had been accused of and found guilty, but he was since paid his time. To this day, the Ensign murders are technically unsolved. But we all know who did it.